Titan Quest II is a new game that feels delightfully old school. In other words, it plays like a game from 10 years ago and looks like a game from 2025. And to be clear, I mean that in a good way. They truly don't make them like they used to when it comes to ARPGs. Also, as a new game, there are much needed quality of life features like easy on-the-fly respecs, that way you can customize your build with ease, WASD movement, which feels really good, and of course, a dash, because every ARPG needs a dash in 2025. The gameplay, though, is very old school. It's much slower paced, you're not going to be mobbed by hordes and hordes of enemies, and there's a lot of nooks and crannies to explore, many of which contain little puzzles, NPCs to interact with, or side quests that you can go on. So if you're going into this looking for an ARPG where you can just blast endgame, then grind loot till your gear's perfect, this isn't going to be the game for you. It is much more of a story-based experience that is about the journey with no destination. And I also found that the combat took a little bit of getting used to, because in most modern ARPGs, movement speed is built into melee skills, meaning you're able to stick to enemies with relative ease. But Titan Quest II does not do this. When you're attacking, your feet are firmly planted. So at first things felt a little bit awkward and I was whiffing some of my attacks, but once I found the Fisher skill, I really hit my stride. Because my plan was to play a big tanky dude with a mace and just bonk stuff. This is not a build archetype that I play very often, which is exactly why I wanted to go out of my comfort zone and do it. And you know what? It was really easy to do this, because Fisher is a spell that you can turn into an attack. I then put on the heaviest armor I could find, and started exploding enemies, in some cases literally, while doing absolutely massive damage and wielding the two-handed mace with the highest damage numbers I could pick up. Looking at early gameplay for Titan Quest II, combat did look a little bit jank to me, but actually playing it for myself now, I'm not sure if things have improved from the earlier tests, or if it simply looks jankier than it feels. Let me know down in the comments. Does what I'm doing right now look janky to you? I can tell you right now, for me, it feels buttery smooth. But the game is more than just endless combat against enemies. There's a lot to explore here, and I spent most of my time looking in the nooks and crannies of a map, as there are often treasure chests or new side quests. There's a nice variety to be found here as well. For one side quest, I just had to kill some enemies. Alright, that's pretty easy. But for another, I found the Staff of Hermes, and I needed to return it to an altar. Alright, a simple fetch quest. Except no, because then I had to attack a turtle and lure it back to the altar and kill it to complete the ritual that summoned all the loot, which was a really nice change of pace after having done a couple of pretty simple fetch quests. It took me about 7 hours to reach the end of a campaign that's available with the early access launch, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of my time playing. With that said, there isn't a ton of content available in the game currently. There are only 4 masteries to choose from, and you spend almost all of your time playing through a single region. If you're looking for an old-school, story-driven ARPG with a world that you can easily get lost in, yes, I recommend Titan Quest II. However, if you're looking for a complete experience, or you're not a fan of early access games, I recommend holding off until 1.0, or at the very least until later in the early access period when the game is more content complete. For now, I want to get into some more details about the combat, builds, story, and exploration. But first, a big thanks to THQ Nordic for sending me a key so I could check the game out and share some of my thoughts.
Now, you. What god did you piss off that you've washed ashore here of all places?
Tell us the whole story. Tell us about hope.
Alright, so combat. The core of any good ARPG, or at the very least, half the core alongside the loot. The basics are pretty simple. You spend energy, think of this as mana, use it to fuel your skills, and those skills damage enemies. So far, all the builds that I've tried revolve around maxing out 1 or 2 primary damage skills, then putting all of my additional points into auras and other utility effects. The skill that I ended up using the most was Fisher. This is a spell that you can convert into a melee attack, and it works really well with big bonks. It's semi-ranged, and it has very good coverage because you can add extra fissures. I found the extra range felt really good, especially on bosses, and the extra fissures let me clear packs with ease. Despite not having many abilities on my bar, combat felt pretty interactive. Enemies often create circles on the ground, which you can dash out of, and if you wear medium armor, by the way, you can reduce that dash cooldown. Plus, there's a barrier skill. This puts a temporary decaying shield on your health. So sometimes, when I knew I wouldn't be able to avoid something, I just popped my barrier and tanked it. Having an active defense like this feels really good. I much prefer something like this to an active directional block or a parry maneuver that requires precise timing. Now last up, when I ran out of energy, sometimes I'd be forced to use my basic attack. This isn't really a spender-generator system between energy regen from my gear and my energy potion. I didn't basic attack all that often. When I did, I could gain overwhelm stacks, and at 3 stacks, my next Fissure was empowered, so it felt like the game was rewarding me for weaving those basic attacks in instead of punishing me for running out of energy. Then, as I got to a higher level and maxed out my primary skill, I began adding in secondary skills. The first thing was an aura that converted all of my damage over to fire. Then there was a leap attack. This way I could get around and sometimes maneuver around enemies. And last up there's this fun little flame circle. While it's active, it increases my movement speed, which is of course fun, gotta go fast. Plus it gives me a damage buff, plus it burns all enemies around me. In short, it's a really fun button to hit, and it certainly helped me mow through packs of enemies. And then there are the game's bosses. I'm going to use the game's first boss of a Griffin as an example here. She uses a mix of weaker attacks that are difficult to avoid, and stronger, well-telegraphed ones. Also, while she has way more health than a regular enemy, it didn't feel like I was just hitting a damage sponge with infinite health. She certainly took visible damage from every swing. Something else that Titan Quest does well is boss mana bars. I knew when her mana was low that she probably wasn't going to do anything dangerous, so I could really tunnel damage into her and spend all of my energy. But when her mana bar reached full, that meant she was likely to use one of her big telegraph moves, so I got ready to dash away, use my barrier, or pop a health potion. And at the same time, these bosses do hit quite hard, so if you're careless, they can kill you, but they feel very fair. I never felt like a boss's move was bullshit, and when I got hit, I really couldn't blame the game. It was my own fault, I should have moved, I saw it coming. Another cool feature, after you defeat bosses, most of them drop a remnant, which you can use to re-summon them to fight the boss again at your leisure. This is a great system that I really wish more Souls-likes had. Overall, I was impressed with the combat in Titan Quest 2. It's usually the aspect of an ARPG that I like the least, especially when it comes to games with a more old-school vibe, because there's just something about old-school ARPGs that usually feels janky to me. But that wasn't the case here at all. It felt super smooth and really interactive. There's one thing though that I miss after having played Path of Exile 2. That being the ability to tie specific skills to one of your 2 weapon sets. And that way you don't have to switch hotbars and swap weapons entirely, you just use the skill and the weapon swap happens automatically. Of course, you can just swap hotbars in Titan Quest 2. It's not that hard, it's bound to tab by default. But it'd be so much smoother just to get the instant feedback of using the skill and having your weapon sets automatically adjust. And so now that I've gone over the basics of combat, let's talk about the build that I used throughout my first playthrough. So now I want to talk about the various systems which come together to make a build, starting with attributes. There are primary attributes, which you directly allocate points into, and secondary attributes, which affect your damage, and you get these by allocating points in the main ones. So vigor, think of it as health. Might, think of it as strength. Agility, think of it as dexterity, and knowledge, think of it as intelligence. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a spellcaster if you're a knowledge build. There are several other options. Because remember, it's those secondary attributes that determine your damage. So fitness, as an example, is the basis for strike and pierce damage. These are the 2 physical damage types. Resolve is the basis for fire and cold. And yes, a lot of strength builds also do fire damage. And then cunning is the basis for your poison and lightning, which means you can have an agility build that is lightning damage, or a knowledge build that is lightning damage. But what's the distinction there? Well, one of the primary distinctions is going to be what armor you're wearing. Coming over here, I happen to have a heavy armor piece for my helmet. Each different armor type has its own special bonus. In the case of heavy armor, it's deflection, a chance for projectiles to deal a glancing blow. If you're a slow, very armored walking tank, you don't exactly want archers just sniping you from a distance. Another type of heavy armor is called ornate armor. This gives defenses against thermic and natural damage. Now my understanding here is thermic is fire and cold, and then natural would be lightning and poison. But notice, you're not seeing might and agility here. You're seeing fitness and agility. You need a lot of a secondary stat and a small amount of a primary stat to wear an armor piece. So as long as I meet the agility requirement, I can get the rest of my fitness from, say, stacking might. This is a medium armor piece, and I think medium armor is the most interesting thing in the game because it has medium armor mobility. Increased dodge cooldown rate. In other words, you get to run around, or I guess dodge around, faster by wearing medium armor. Weapons also have requirements. Some of them just one requirement, like this mace. It's a big bonk stick, so it only requires might. On the other hand, this requires just fitness. This requires just resilience. I think it's resilient. Sorry, that's right. Resolve, not resilience. That's gear, which is only about half of your build. The other half is your mastery. Near the start of a game, you select a mastery. For example, Warfare, or in my case, the second mastery I selected is Earth. Your two masteries combine to make your class. In my case, the class is Battle Mage. In addition to this, you have some core skills. Every time you level up, you gain active points and passive points. As you progress through the game, you also gain divinity points. Allocating divinity points on the left let you unlock more tiers. So this is unlocked by default. For this you need 6, and for this you need 18. That's why I have all 3 tiers of talents in Earth, but only 2 out of the 3 in Warfare. I don't have 18 points, I only have 17, so I need 1 more divinity if I want to, say, play a Rain of Arrows build. Your active points go in here on the left side, your passive points go on the right. Core skills, these are available regardless of your mastery, and I've probably neglected them in my playthrough because for example, if I allocated points into it, I could gain additional charges, or I could increase the dash distance, which would feel really good, especially if I was wearing medium armor. So now I think it's about time to talk about the really interesting way skill customization works in Titan Quest 2. As you put ranks into skills, you get these little shields. You can think of them as modifier points. You get 10 of them by skill rank 17, which is currently the maximum. You then spend them on the available modifiers down here. So normally, Fissure is a spell, but by purchasing Slam Attack, I have turned it into a melee slam. I am then scaling it by adding additional fissures. That way, when I attack, you see it generates 3 fissures instead of a regular 1. But note here, the additional fissures have these 2 little shield symbols, which means to take both of them, I'm spending 4 out of a total 10 customization points that I have for all the modifiers on the skill. Combine that with Slam, and that's half of my modifiers. I filled in the rest, trying to maximize my damage through 3 ranks in enhanced damage, then picking up Staggering Force so I have a chance to stun enemies, and Interrupt so that my attack is more effective against channeling foes and also stuns them. You have to balance direct damage, quality of life, and additional effects like, let's just say, Lava Fissure, where you'd get a bunch of lava that deals damage every 0.5 seconds. I didn't end up going the Lava Fissure route, but in a future playthrough, I might be playing a Lava Fissure spell version of this build. Last up, passives also have mastery choices. They're called feats, and you get to pick 2 out of a 3, usually one at either 4 or 6 points, and then the other at 8 or 12, depending on how many points the skill can go up to. So this one goes up to 8, this one goes up to 12. One thing that's very nice is a respec mode. So let's say I didn't like my current build, I could just refund all for about 7,000 gold, play a completely new build. But maybe I don't want to refund all. Maybe I just don't like some of the things that I've put into Earth Enchantment. I think I don't need 17 ranks in that. I want to put some points into Ring of Flame. Well, I just do like this and like this. But also, if you're just changing the modifiers, you don't even need to respec. I could just take a point out of, let's say, Fire Resistance and put it into Stone Skin. And you can do this at any time on the fly. There's no cost to swapping modifiers. There is a gold cost to respec, but as you can see, a full respec costs about 7,000 gold, and I have 28, almost 29,000, so it's not super punishing. I never felt like I was going to run out of gold just because I had to respec. Also, once you reach the town of Pyrgos, you unlock Rituals of Athena at the Ritual Shrine, which allows you to respec your attribute points. This is more costly, it's not something you should do lightly, but it is an option, so you are never 100% locked in or set in stone. And so that about covers the basics of gearing, but there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, and that is item rarity. Because early on, most of the items you're going to pick up are white, but then you'll quickly start seeing yellow magic items. These have a couple modifiers, and in general you should always put something on over a white item. But it gets a little bit more tricky when we're talking about green items, which are rares. Green items tend to have 3 or 4 modifiers, and there are just some magic items, such as these boots, that lower my movement skill cooldown. They were just better than any of the rare items that I was offered. The next rarity level is Monster Infrequents. This is something that might sound familiar to you if you've played Grim Dawn. And these have special infrequent modifiers, such as the base weapon ailment chance. If I was playing some sort of poison or maybe burn build, I might want to use this bow. Then the last item type that I have encountered so far are epics. These are blue, and they are very often thought of as signature items. So I defeated the Hippocampus boss, and I got this axe. It was really awesome, and it carried me almost to the end of the early access content. Also, I completed a quest for Calinus, and I got his sword. Again, a really cool weapon. Just didn't quite fit with my make the biggest bonks possible build. As you can see, a 24-25 top end, I put on the one-handed sword. Not exactly big bonks anymore. Way faster, might even be better, depending on the skill I was using, but it's not going to match the mace for big old bonks. So now, let's take a minute to talk about the world, quests, and story. When you first enter the world, you're presented with a wide open map full of possibilities, a blank slate with a lot of space to explore. Yes, quest objectives are clearly marked, and you can just beeline objectives if you really want, but I found there's plenty of good reasons to wander off the main path. One of the first encounters I had with these random areas was opening a secret room right at the start of the game before I'd finished the tutorial area, and finding a treasure chest so filled with items it took me 10 minutes to sort everything out. I still don't know if that was a bug or if there's actually that much loot that's supposed to pop out. Either way, it was a really fun early experience. At another point, I struck up a conversation with a somewhat ominous statue. At first it seemed friendly enough, but before I knew it, I was fighting a dangerous boss, the Hippocampus. Another time, I wandered into an area and found myself transformed into a goat. I mean, sure, I'd been killing a bunch of stuff, I knew I was pretty good, but the greatest of all time? That's awesome. Yeah, no, turns out a nearby naiad was angry and turning people into goats because a bandit stole her lily. After I returned it to her, she agreed to release the people she had been holding hostage. No hard feelings, I guess. There are also puzzles to find and solve. Usually when you find a puzzle, it's not going to work the first time, but there's a clue nearby that'll tell you what to do. For example, when exploring a cave, I found some braziers, and I lit first 1, then 2, then 3. After lighting all of them, I expected to find a room full of treasure. Instead I found, a room that did have some treasure in it, but also a really grumpy guy that was trying to hide and wanted me to leave and close the door behind me. I figured he might get violent if I didn't do what he said, so I just quietly took all the loot, left, closed the door, and I don't know, I'll probably come back in 100 years and find a skeleton in there still. The way the game rewards you for leaving the golden path helps to make the world feel vibrant and alive. Plus, most of the NPCs, even the minor ones, have voice acting.
Please help me! He's trying to force me to join his bandit troop. I barely know how to swing a sword.
Stranger, I told you to shut your mouth and wait your turn for an audience.
In addition to all this, no matter what you do, most side content just finding a dead end with a treasure chest, you're quite likely to find a weapon or an armor piece or some other gear upgrade that makes it feel worth your time. In particular, I went out of my way to do side quests, as I found a lot of these rewarded me with things like divinity points and attribute points, which let me get that little extra edge against the next boss I faced. As for the main story, the goddess Nemesis is hunting you, and you need to find the 3 fates. Maybe they'll be able to tell you why, maybe they'll be able to help you fight back. But I'm not going to go into that in too much detail in this video. Not out of an attempt to avoid spoilers, but because this is really only the story's opening act. So at the moment, it's a little too incomplete to give a proper review. And so those are my thoughts on Titan Quest 2 after playing through all the content available at the early access launch. When it comes to early access games, I always recommend them based on what they are now, not what they may someday be. Personally, I had a lot of fun with the 7 hours that I spent exploring, killing things, and completing side quests in my first playthrough. So much so, that when I finally met the fates and got the screen telling me I'd reached the end of the current early access content, my thought was, oh, that's it? Immediately followed by, alright, time to try a different character then because I have more builds I want to explore. So if that sounds appealing to you, then I definitely recommend Titan Quest 2. On the other hand, if you want a complete experience, or if you're looking for something with an endgame loop, I recommend waiting until 1.0, or at the very least until later in the early access cycle. Also, if you're looking for a game to sink hours and hours and hours into, maybe hold off, because my first playthrough did take about 7 hours. There's a system of the Altar of Ritual, specifically Ritual of Ares, that does allow you to increase the difficulty of the world. It also allows you to farm bosses over and over, respawn enemies. Basically a pseudo endgame loop where you can keep doing harder content and fighting more stuff. But it is far from complete, and it is far from a proper endgame. That said, there are plans to have a proper endgame, it's just not here quite yet. But personally, I've been missing a time when games weren't always infinite grind live services. So Titan Quest II did a great job of scratching an itch that I've been having for a while. And so now, I'm gonna go make another character or two and try different build archetypes. And if you want to see how that turns out, then do be sure to get subscribed, as I'm probably going to make at least one video on builds I've played in Titan Quest II. I don't know if I'm going to make a video for each individual build, or just a video of all the builds I've played. Either way, that's coming up, get subscribed. Also, if you want to see more of my thoughts on other games, head over to my Steam Curator page, where I have reviews for over 100 games. That'll be linked up in the card and down below. But at this point, I'd like to get back to playing Titan Quest II, so that's going to be it for me today. Thank you very much for watching to the end. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.